When I refused to co-sign his loan, my brother told our parents I abandoned the family. I said no to co-signing my brother's business loan, and within a week, he'd told our parents I'd abandoned the family until a spreadsheet on my laptop told them a very different story. I want to start from the beginning, because none of this makes sense unless you understand how we got there. My name is Claire. I'm 35. My brother Marcus is 38. Our parents, Walter and Diane, raised us in a house where love and money were never quite separate things. I became an accountant. Marcus became, depending on the year you asked him, a restaurateur, an entrepreneur, a visionary, and once memorably a disruptor in the auto-deterting space. I want you to understand something before I go further. I never resented Marcus for dreaming big. I resented what dreaming big cost everyone else. Our parents are in their late 60s now. Dad worked 31 years at the same manufacturing plant. Mom taught elementary school until her knees gave out. They are not wealthy people. They are careful people, or they used to be, before Marcus learned that a certain kind of crisis in his voice could open their checkbook faster than anything else. At first, it was small things. When Marcus was 26, he asked our parents for $8,000 to get through a rough patch after a job fell through. They gave it to him without hesitation. I didn't think much of it at the time. Siblings help each other, parents help their kids. That's how families work, or that's what I believed then. Then it got a little bigger. 2 years later, Marcus opened a small restaurant with a business partner he'd known for 6 months. He asked our parents to put up $20,000 as a down payment on equipment. Dad took it out of his retirement account. The restaurant closed 14 months later. Nobody ever really talked about where that money went. I asked once, gently, over dinner, and Mom changed the subject to whether I wanted more potatoes. Then it got bigger again. When the restaurant folded, Marcus moved back in with our parents for what was supposed to be 3 months and became closer to 2 years. During that time, I noticed small things starting to disappear from conversations, like mentions of Mom's medication getting refilled a few days late or a comment about Dad picking up extra shifts consulting after retirement. When I asked Mom directly if money was tight, she said, "We're fine, honey. Don't worry about us." I found out 11 months later that they'd taken a second, smaller loan against the house, and Marcus had been the reason. Around that same time, Marcus asked me directly for help too, the first time he'd ever come to me instead of our parents. He said his car needed brakes and he was $300 short. I transferred it that afternoon without thinking twice, the way you'd help anyone you loved. A few weeks later, I mentioned the brakes in passing, hoping the car was running smoother, and he looked at me blankly for a second before saying, "Oh, right, yeah, all good now." Months after that, I found out from a mutual friend that he'd used the money as a deposit on a new phone instead. I never brought it up. I told myself it was small, that it didn't matter, that I shouldn't keep score over $300. I understand now that not bringing it up was its own kind of mistake. I raised it once. I sat down with both of them on a Sunday afternoon, the good china still in the cabinet from lunch, and asked them plainly if they understood how much they'd given Marcus over the years and what it was costing their own retirement. My father set his coffee cup down carefully, like he was trying not to spill anything, and said, "He's your brother. Family helps family. You'll understand when you have kids of your own who need you." I did have a daughter by then. She was 2. I remember thinking, I understand exactly what that means, and it's why I'm asking. I want you to understand something. I wasn't trying to punish Marcus for struggling. Everyone struggles. I was trying to get my parents to see a pattern before it became the only story their retirement told. By the time Marcus turned 37, he had a new venture, a mobile auto-deterting business, 3 trucks, a logo, a business plan he'd had a friend format in a nice template. He asked our parents for money again. This time, Dad hesitated. For the first time in over a decade, he said he needed to think about it. Marcus, in response, brought the conversation to Sunday dinner in front of everyone and asked me directly, at the table, if I'd co-sign a personal loan for the equipment instead, since my credit was clean and the bank would approve it faster with 2 names on it. I remember exactly what the table looked like when he asked. Mom had made her pot roast, the good one, the one she only made for occasions that mattered to her. My daughter was in her booster seat next to me, smearing mashed potatoes across her tray. Marcus set his phone down on the table, screen up, a loan pre-approval page already open, like the conversation was a formality and not a question. I said I needed to think about it too. Marcus laughed, not a real laugh, the kind people use when they're testing whether you're serious. He said, "Come on, Claire, we're family. This isn't a big deal." I looked at my husband across the table, and he gave me a small, steady look that told me he'd support whatever I decided. I told Marcus I'd look at the numbers and get back to him within the week. That night, I want to be honest with you, I felt guilty already before I'd even said no. That's the strange thing about growing up in a family where help is currency. Even considering saying no feels like theft. The following Tuesday, I asked Marcus to send me the actual loan terms and his current financial picture, since co-signing meant I'd be legally responsible for the debt if he defaulted. He sent me a screenshot of the loan amount and told me not to worry about the rest, that it was handled. I told him I couldn't co-sign anything without seeing the full picture. He didn't respond for 2 days. When he did respond, it wasn't with numbers. It was with a voice memo, 4 minutes long, about how hurt he was that I didn't trust him, about how I'd always been the one who made things complicated, about how our parents had never hesitated to help him, and here I was treating a simple favor like a business negotiation. I called my bank's small business lending officer that week, a calm, precise man named Mr. Chen, not to apply for anything but to understand what co-signing would actually mean for me. He walked me through it plainly. If I co-signed, I would be 100% responsible for repaying the loan if Marcus missed a single payment, regardless of whose business the money went into. He asked if I'd seen the applicant's credit report and existing debt obligations. I said no, my brother hadn't shared them. Mr. Chen said, in the gentlest way a banker can say something like this, I'd never recommend signing on to a debt for someone whose full financial picture you haven't seen. That's not distrust, that's just how lending works. That was the first time anyone outside my immediate family had told me that what I was asking for wasn't unreasonable. I called Marcus back and told him calmly that I couldn't co-sign the loan without seeing his full financial picture first, current debts, credit score, everything. He went quiet on the phone for a long moment, and then he said, wow, okay. I guess I know where I stand with you now. He hung up before I could respond. 3 days later, my mother called me, her voice tight in a way I recognized from childhood, the tone she used right before delivering news she didn't want to deliver. She said Marcus had come to dinner the night before and told her and Dad that I'd refused to help him, that I'd basically told him I didn't care what happened to his business, that I was choosing money over family. She said, I don't understand, Claire. We raised you better than this. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, my daughter's crayons scattered across the tile in front of me, and I felt something crack open in my chest. I want that on the record. It wasn't anger first, it was grief. Grief that 35 years of being the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who never asked for anything, had been erased in a single phone call because I'd asked to see a credit report. I told my mother the truth, as plainly as I could. I said I hadn't refused anything. I said I'd asked for information that any bank would require before approving a loan, and Marcus had responded with a voice memo instead of a spreadsheet. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, he's under a lot of stress right now, Claire. Can't you just help him for us? I understood then that this wasn't really about the loan anymore. It was about whether I would once again absorb the cost of keeping the peace. I told her I needed some time, and I hung up gently, and I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time after. 2 days later, Marcus posted something on social media, not naming me directly, but close enough that everyone in the family group chat knew exactly who it was about. It said something about how some people forget where they came from once they've made it, and how blood should mean more than a bank statement. My aunt commented on a single heart. My cousin commented, sending you strength, Marcus. Nobody asked me what had actually happened. The following week, my father called, which almost never happened. Since phone calls were usually my mother's job, he didn't yell. He never yelled. He said, in a low, disappointed voice I remembered from being 16 and missing curfew, that he was surprised at me, that family was supposed to be the one thing you could count on, that he'd hoped I'd raised my own daughter to understand that. I told him, as evenly as I could manage, that I loved Marcus and that loving him didn't mean handing over my name on a legal document without understanding what I was agreeing to. He said, it's just a loan, Claire. It's not that complicated. I told him it was exactly that complicated and that I'd be happy to explain why if he wanted to actually listen. He didn't call back that week. That same week, my mother-in-law, of all people, mentioned over the phone that she'd heard from a mutual friend that things were tense in my family. That word had apparently traveled 2 towns over already. I realized then how far Marcus's version of events had spread, retold at church, at his old softball league, and at the barbershop Dad still went to every third Saturday, each retelling sanding down the actual details a little more until all that was left was a sister who'd turned her back. I want to be honest with you. Part of me wondered if I was being too rigid, too cold, too much like the accountant everyone joked I'd become. But another part of me, the part that had watched our parents' retirement account shrink by tens of thousands of dollars over a decade, knew that just a loan had never once, in our family's history, stayed just a loan. The following Monday, I did something I'd been avoiding for years. I sat down and built a spreadsheet. I am an accountant. I have bank statements going back a decade, family group chat screenshots, and a memory that, it turns out, is better than I wanted it to be. I documented every loan, every gift, every just this once that Marcus had received from our parents since he turned 26. The $8,000 for the rough patch, the $20,000 for the restaurant. The second mortgage nobody talked about. Smaller amounts here and there, birthday money that turned into rent money, a loan for a car repair that was never repaid. When I added it all up, the total came to just under $110,000, spread across 12 years with no documented repayment on any of it. I want you to know I wasn't building this to humiliate Marcus. I was building it because I needed my parents to see the whole shape of something they'd only ever experienced one crisis at a time. That same week, I called my cousin Renata, the one person in the extended family who'd always been quietly honest with me, and asked her what she'd actually heard about the loan situation. She told me the family group chat had been told I'd flatly refused to help Marcus out of spite. Nothing about credit reports or financial disclosure, nothing about the voice memo. She said carefully, that doesn't really sound like you, Claire. What actually happened? I told her, and she went quiet for a moment, then said, I think you should tell them exactly what you told me. All of it, in order. 2 weeks after that, my mother showed up at my house unannounced on a Saturday morning, holding a container of soup like it might fix something. She sat at my kitchen table, and instead of talking about Marcus, she talked about how tired she was, how she felt caught in the middle, and how she just wanted everyone to get along. I made her tea, and I listened, and at the end I said, gently, that I understood she was tired and that I wasn't asking her to choose sides. I was asking her to look at the actual numbers with me. She didn't want to look that day. She left the soup and left soon after. I didn't push. I kept gathering. That same week, I finally told my husband the full extent of what I'd been holding on to for years. Not just the loan request, but every quiet moment going back a decade where I'd swallowed a comment or covered a gap without saying anything. He listened for a long time without interrupting, and when I finished, he said something I hadn't expected. He said, "You've been the family's shock absorber for longer than we've been married." I hadn't had a word for it before that. Shock absorber. It fit better than anything I'd have come up with myself. The week after that, Marcus tried a new approach. He called me directly. Not with an apology, but with a proposal that maybe I didn't need to co-sign the whole loan. Maybe I could just lend him $10,000 personally instead, with no bank involved, no paperwork, just family helping family. I told him I appreciated him thinking of another option and that I still needed to see his current financial picture before I could consider anything, a loan or a gift. He said, "You've turned into someone I don't recognize." I told him I was the same person who'd been quietly worried about this pattern for over a decade and that maybe he just hadn't been listening before. A few days after that call, I got a text from my aunt, forwarded from Marcus, a screenshot of an old family photo from a 4th of July barbecue with the caption, "Remember when we used to actually be a family?" I stared at it for a long time before deciding not to respond. Responding felt like agreeing to argue on a battlefield he'd chosen, one made entirely of nostalgia instead of numbers. By the following month, I had the spreadsheet finished, printed, and organized by year, along with copies of the 2 mortgage documents my parents had eventually shown me when I asked directly, and a folder of text messages spanning 6 years, each one a version of the same request with a different amount attached. Building it took 3 evenings after my daughter went to bed, my husband bringing me coffee at the kitchen table without asking questions, just setting the mug down and squeezing my shoulder before going back to the living room. I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Steady. I decided the right place to finally lay all of this out was not a phone call and not a private conversation that could later be recounted differently to whoever wasn't in the room. It needed to happen with everyone present, the same way the accusation had been made, at the table, in front of the whole family. My parents' anniversary dinner was coming up, the one gathering every year where everyone showed up. Aunts, cousins, Marcus, and all of us, around the same long table Dad had built himself 30 years earlier. I asked my mother if I could come early to help set up, and she said yes, sounding relieved, like she thought this meant things were smoothing over. The night before the dinner, I sat at my own kitchen table and wrote out exactly what I wanted to say, not to score points, but so I wouldn't get pulled into an argument about feelings when the facts were what actually mattered. I read it out loud to my husband 3 times until it stopped shaking in my voice. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said, "You've been carrying this alone for a long time." I told him I didn't want to carry it alone anymore. The dinner started ordinarily enough. Mom's china was out again, the same set from that Sunday years earlier. Dad said grace. Marcus arrived 20 minutes late with a bottle of wine and a story about traffic. For the first half hour, nobody mentioned the loan at all, and I started to wonder if I'd lose my nerve. Then my aunt, without any idea what she was stepping into, turned to me and said brightly, "So, are you finally going to help your brother out, or what?" The table went quiet in that specific way. Tables go quiet when everyone already knows the answer isn't simple. I want that on the record. I didn't raise my voice. I set down my fork, and I said I actually did want to talk about it, since everyone at the table seemed to have an opinion already. I asked if anyone minded if I shared some numbers. I opened the folder I'd brought and set it on the table, not dramatically, just plainly, the way you'd set down a report at work. I read the total out loud first, $109,800, given to Marcus over 12 years, across 9 separate instances with no documented repayment on any of it. I watched my father's face change as I said the number. I don't think he'd ever heard it added up before. I don't think anyone had. Marcus said immediately that I was twisting things, that some of that was gifts, not loans, and that I was making it sound worse than it was. I said calmly that I'd labeled each entry exactly as it had been described to me at the time, gift or loan, and that either way, the newest request was for me personally to take on legal responsibility for a debt I'd never been shown the full terms of. My mother picked up the folder and started turning pages slowly, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. She stopped at the page with the second mortgage documents, the ones she'd shown me only after I'd pressed twice, and I watched something settle in her face, not anger exactly, more like exhaustion finally catching up to 12 years of not looking too closely. My father was the one who spoke next, and I didn't expect it. He said quietly to Marcus, "Is this accurate?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked around the table, waiting for someone to soften it for him the way people always had. Nobody did. My aunt, the one who'd asked the question that started all of this, said, "I had no idea it was that much." My cousin Renata, sitting near the end of the table, said nothing but gave me a small nod, the kind that told me she'd meant what she said on the phone weeks earlier. Marcus tried once more, quieter this time, his voice catching a little. "I was going to pay it all back," he said. "Every time I meant it." My father asked, gently but plainly, "How many times can you mean it before it stops counting?" I don't think I'd ever heard my father say anything that direct to Marcus in my entire life. Marcus finally said, his voice tight, that he never meant for it to add up to that much, that every time felt small in the moment, that he'd always planned to pay it back once the next thing worked out. I believed that he believed it. I also believed that the next thing had been the plan for 12 years, and it had cost our parents a chunk of a retirement they could not get back. My father looked at me and asked plainly why I hadn't said something sooner. I told him I had, more than once, gently, at kitchen tables and Sunday dinners, and that every time, I'd been told that family helps family and that I should understand when I have kids of my own who need help. I said I did understand. I said that was exactly why I was finally saying this now, in front of everyone, instead of one more time in private where it could be forgotten by Tuesday. Nobody argued with that. The following week, we had a very different kind of family conversation, quieter and smaller, just my parents, Marcus and me, sitting in their living room instead of around the dinner table. My father said he wanted to talk to a financial advisor before any more money moved in any direction, family or otherwise. Marcus didn't like that. He said it felt like they didn't trust him anymore. My mother gently but firmly said, "It's not about trust, honey. It's about being able to retire." I don't think she'd ever said a sentence like that to him before. Marcus didn't come to Sunday dinner for a while after that. It was strange sitting around that table without him. The seat where he always sat closest to Dad noticeably empty. My mother struggled with that more than I did. She'd spent decades believing that keeping everyone fed and smiling at one table meant the family was fine. It took her longer to understand that the smiling had been covering something for years. The following spring, things had settled into something calmer, though not fully repaired. Marcus started paying our parents back, slowly, in small monthly amounts, tracked now in an actual ledger my father kept in a drawer in the kitchen. It wasn't much, it was something. He and I didn't talk for a few months, and when we finally did, it was over coffee, careful and a little stiff, both of us picking our words like we were walking on a floor we weren't sure would hold. He apologized, eventually, not for asking for help over the years, but for the voice memo, for the social media post, and for telling our parents I'd abandoned the family instead of telling them the truth that I'd asked a reasonable question he hadn't wanted to answer. I told him I appreciated that, and that I still loved him, and that loving him didn't mean I would ever again sign my name to something I hadn't been allowed to see clearly. That same spring, my father started sitting down with my daughter on Sunday afternoons, teaching her to count coins into little paper rolls the way his own father had taught him. I watched them from the kitchen doorway one afternoon, her small hands stacking quarters, his patient voice explaining what each roll was worth, and I thought about how strange it was that it had taken all of this for him to talk about money with anyone in our family as plainly as he was talking about it with a 6-year-old. I started seeing a therapist that winter too, not because of one uncomfortable dinner, but because I realized how long I'd been carrying the emotional cost of being the responsible one without anyone ever asking if that role was sustainable. My husband came to a session with me once. We talked, really talked, about the difference between being generous and being used and how easily a family can blur the two if nobody ever names the difference out loud. That November, at Thanksgiving, my mother asked me, almost shyly, if I'd help her set up a simple budgeting spreadsheet for her and Dad, something she could actually understand at a glance. We sat together at the kitchen table for an hour, while my daughter colored beside us, and it was the first time in years that money had come up between us and felt like collaboration instead of damage control. By the following anniversary dinner, a year almost to the day since the folder had come out at that same table, things looked different in small, quiet ways. Marcus brought a spreadsheet of his own that year, a simple one, showing what he'd repaid so far and what was left. Nobody made a speech about it. Dad just looked at it, nodded once, and said, "Good," and passed the potatoes. I still think about that night sometimes. The folder on the table, my mother's reading glasses sliding down her nose, and the specific silence that followed a number nobody had ever said out loud before. I think about how small that folder looked sitting there and how enormous it felt to finally open it. Here's what I've learned, and I say this as plainly as I can. Love that keeps a ledger isn't love, but love that refuses to look at one isn't honesty either. Family helping family only works if everyone's name on the page means something. Saying no to a debt you can't see the shape of isn't abandonment. It's the only kind of help that doesn't eventually cost you everything. A pattern nobody adds up will keep repeating because it never has to answer for itself. And the people who call you disloyal for asking questions are usually the ones most afraid of the answer. I'm not angry at Marcus anymore. Not the way I was that first week on my kitchen floor. I'm just clear now, in a way I wasn't before. That's the difference honesty makes. It doesn't erase what happened. It just finally lets everyone see the whole page. Thank you for listening to our story. If it meant something to you, consider subscribing. There's more where this came from.